Gentlemen, start your engines, brothers.
All right, everybody. It's the best time of the week. It's the NASCAR breakdown over here at Breaking Balls Podcast. And folks, if you've been listening to the YouTube or watching the last few weeks, we've been breaking down the teams, team by team, but it's the meat, the potatoes. We're ready to break down the full 2023 season over here. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready, Bob. The Clash is here, and we are not talking about British punk bands. We're talking about NASCAR races, baby. It's back. You know, Bob, I got to say, it's kind of a bummer not to have you here. Last year, obviously, we went to the Clash live, and it was probably the birth, planted the seed for this podcast. But you know what, Bob? Always good to be back talking racing with you. We've got a lot to talk about today. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, and for the record, this is a Sex Pistols podcast. This is not a Clash podcast for if we're doing British punk. So you just have to get that on the record for podcast history here and for the timestamp. But anyway, yeah, I am sad not doing the Clash this year with you. This really kind of, I've never thought about it. I guess this kind of was kind of the birth of the podcast last year. But, you know, duty calls, work-related things, and, you know, can't get off. That's okay. We'll be in LA in a few months. But until then, the boys in NASCAR are going to have to take it up with me, and that's fine because, God, it's so exciting to have cars on the track, isn't it? I mean, no matter how big or small the track is, it's what, half a mile, if that? I mean, it's just so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, they're right on top of each other. Weird rules, more used to if you watch any of the World of Outlaws stuff, kind of the dirt track racing, local stuff. We're going to have heats, A main, B main, all sorts of stuff like that. It's things that you don't necessarily see at NASCAR races. There's going to be concerts. Cypress Hill is going to be there. There's all sorts of things going on at this Clash, Bob. So, you know, it's one of these events that I think it's such a fun and exciting way for NASCAR to kick off their season in a very relevant way. Bringing it to LA to where, you know, car culture here is really, a lot of people don't understand it, but there really is a healthy car culture here. Such a way that when you put the event in the middle of South Central, in the middle of the Coliseum like that, people are going, and I'm really anxious to see if they can kind of keep the momentum up from last year, Bob, because you know we had a great time at that event.
It was a great spectacle. Being in the iconic Coliseum, you're not supposed to have racing in there. I mean, it didn't feel right, but at the same time, it felt awesome. It was just such a cool thing for a sports fan that even if you weren't a motorsports fan, I mean, I think you'd be honest on this podcast going into that race, you weren't the biggest NASCAR fan, and look at where we are a year later. It just shows exactly what the Clash did, that, you know, there's a handful. If they can grab that every single time they do the Clash, moving it from Daytona, I mean, the excitement is just palpable. And I will say, you know, Ad, you mentioned car culture in South Central. I'm very excited to see if, you know, your Ford might potentially make an appearance on the track. It's been lost for a few weeks now still. I'm just saying, I have a little hope.
I think there is going to be I don't know. I mean, everybody said that the money team was going to show up to Daytona. Maybe the Peso team or something of that like may show up to the Clash at the Coliseum, and that way they can enter my car. Because at this point, who knows, Bob? Maybe we will get to see my car again. I never even thought of it like that.
If you see a Ford Fusion on the track, an old gen, that white Ford Fusion hybrid, that means that Adam's car has somehow made it into the Coliseum, folks.
Yeah, I mean, leather seats would be a little too nice for the stock car race that's going on. But I mean, hey, maybe it'll be the pace car. That would be crazy. Maybe they'll, maybe that's what happened. Maybe NASCAR stole my car in order to make sure they had something to pace the field with the Clash. That would be a welcome sacrifice.
No, but Ad, you mentioned it. We were there last year, so I am curious. You know, we were in person, and it was great to see on TV because, you know, like you said, it's kind of that old school, you know, Saturday night short track race with all the different heats, the different mains, last chance qualifiers. I am curious to see what our perspective is going to be like this week. You know, watching it on TV, you know, you get the commercials, the downtime. You know, you don't have that smell of burnt rubber in the air. I am curious what it's going to be like if we're going to have the same feeling as, you know, being in person. That was definitely an in-person event that was made for TV, but I'm curious if we have the same, you know, feelings coming away this week.
Yeah, I am kind of excited because it's one of the first events we'll be able to contrast for sure. Whether the what NASCAR is like in person versus on TV. I think last year was cool. We got a very cool experience. Shout out to Daniel. His I believe it's his uncle works for NASCAR and on the production side, so we kind of got to go behind the scenes and see how much goes into the production of the TV production of an event like the Clash. So very excited to kind of see this one on TV. It was fun to be there. Plenty of stuff. I think the in stadium host did such a good job at the Coliseum last year, kind of keeping people involved, like as they were, setting up the different races and things like that. I'm anxious to see how the broadcast fills the time because it was one of those things where you were never really wanting for action last year when we were there in person. I'm anxious to see if that feeling continues, with us watching it on TV this year.
No, absolutely. And you're going to have some entertainment in the stands, like you said. It feels like, generational songbirds for each generation. You've got Cypress Hill for the older crowd, the Wiz Khalifa music for the millennial Gen Zs like us. And then, Dixie D'Amelio's even going to do a song they're at for the youngsters. So, really fun for the whole family is the Clash over here. And just what a list of three there. But
throw like a list of relevant people. Just put a list of them, names in a hat, and pull them out. And that's what NASCAR seems to have done here. Because where else do you get the combination of Cypress Hill, Dixie D'Amelio, and Wiz Khalifa? I mean, just chef's kiss, NASCAR. Well done.
Can't wait for that, but I am excited to watch the cars on track. Last year there was a lot of questions about the next gen cars for the first time it had ever been in a competitive environment. You had a couple of guys go out with some mechanical issues. I remember Tyler Reddick and Denny Hamlin both came to mind immediately. I think this year there's definitely a little bit more certainty with the cars, so they're going to probably be able to send it a little bit more. I don't know if it's possible to send it as much as Ty Dillon did last year in each of his main races. So just going into this general weekend, is there anything that you are just really dying to see or dying to think about with the Clash, cars on track, the next gen? You've seen it already a year. Is there anything going in this weekend that you have some questions about?
Yeah, I think last year, like you said, we watched this race and it was the first time that the next gen cars were on the track. So I think this year, what we do know going into the Clash is that the short track package has left us wanting more. That's the one thing that we can say consistently from all of our short track racing last year in NASCAR that we watched. It always kind of left you wanting more. And hopefully, it's one of these things. Now that I know that the short package kind of sucks, is it going to ruin the spectacle that is this race for me? Because it kind of felt like, guys were moving each other around and things like that, but it still felt kind of conservative last year. Twofold. One, because it felt like they were kind of still getting used to the car, and two, there wasn't that much. We were still dealing with the manufacturing shortage and the supply chain shortage, so nobody really wanted to do anything to mess with the cars in hopes that, in fear of not being able to get the parts that they needed for the next week at Daytona and stuff like that. So I'm just curious to see, with a year under the belt, we know that the short track package isn't necessarily awesome. But will they be able to put on a great show like they did last year? Will it stand up with all of the criticism that short track racing took last year with this next gen car? I'm just anxious to see what the on track product looks like here, Bob.
Yeah, you mentioned the on track product especially, and the next gen car. When you think about it, last year, yeah, the short track racing wasn't great, but the racing as a whole was pretty darn good. But there was a lot of safety concerns, and that's really what I'm interested to see going into this year. Is you watch those dudes really send it into each other last year, especially that Kurt Busch, Ty Dillon main. I think it was the second race in the early afternoon ad.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys. I mean, Harrison Burton was involved in that. I think Austin Cindric was. They were just taking each other out. I'm curious to see if these guys just kind of, send it and wreck each other with, the safety concerns that rear clip has had, or if they're going to be a little bit more file into line and, bumping each other, giving each other the bumper, more of that traditional Bristol style, if you will.
Yeah, It's hard to say. I mean, it certainly is something that you have to think about if you're behind the wheels of one of these cars, because if the season were starting today, Kurt Busch would still not be cleared to race. A lot of people, that's one of those stories that kind of gets buried in all of this, but Kurt Busch still isn't cleared to race even if he wanted to. And I mean, that's kind of got to be, it's a dark cloud hanging over the sport. I haven't heard anything really concrete that they've done to fix this car. I'm sure that hopefully that they've sent something out to drivers to let them know the things that they've done to maybe fix things. But I mean, there was a lot to do and a big to do about everything in this offseason that they needed to fix, but we really haven't heard anything. So what does this look like going forward? Are the drivers going to be less prone to take chances, which obviously is something that the sport can't afford, because the more chances they take, the more interesting it gets.
Yeah, NASCAR is never been shy about what's the word I'm looking for here? They don't race each other gentlemanly like F1. They like to beat and bang. Rubbin's racing. I guess, Ad, that's probably the phrase that sums up NASCAR more than anything. Rubbin's racing.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a bumper. You may as well use it.
It's science. It's common knowledge. It really is. The Clash really does take them back to that old school, small short track mentality that, NASCAR was founded on. And yeah, it's a little bit shorter and a little bit more unconventional than your, normal short track on a Saturday night, but it's in the middle of South Central LA at one of the most iconic venues. I credit NASCAR for pulling this off back-to-back years. I'm very curious to see what the attendance looks like here, Ad, because, to kick off the season, you want something to be excited about. And I think Daytona lost its luster even with the road course. So, to kick off 2023, I'm very curious to see if they keep doing stuff like this, but I'm all for it. All for it.
Yeah, it just seems like it's kind of a match made in heaven there. I mean, you've got all the USC and the college students. You've got the heavy drinking culture that comes around with NASCAR and stuff like that. So, and plus, it's been very well advertised throughout this, and throughout the area. There's billboards, there's been commercials, all sorts of things. So, really, really hoping that NASCAR gets out on the right foot as far as the season goes, because honestly, they need to. And this is a market that, when they come here for the West Coast swing, it's a market that NASCAR needs to be relevant in. And this kind of helps build that and kind of bridge that generational gap. So hopefully they have another successful year of the Clash, Bob.
And you mentioned the market there. The Fontana race is, 5 weeks after this. It's pretty relatively close right after. You can keep that momentum going if you're NASCAR in that market in LA and in the California market, because, Ad, we're going to preview the season here. 2023, if it's even somewhat like the 2022 season, it's not going to be hard to retain a lot of these people. It was entertaining throughout the whole season.
Yeah, you never really knew who was going to win races week to week. Everyone seemed competitive. The next gen car we were told that it was going to give us parity, and that's exactly what it delivered. I mean, there was seemed like a new winner every week. So much going on. The cars themselves, I think, a lot of the safety concerns took away from the strong racing that it did produce. So very anxious to see if they could kind of make this season less about the safety concerns with the car, and we can put more of a microscope or a telescope, whatever the hell you want to put on it. We just need to magnify the good parts of this car, because it has produced some good racing, Bob.
Agreed. And, we'll jump right into it, Ad. 2023, obviously, I don't even know where you start. I think we probably need to look at what's changed this year. So a couple of new guys are running full-time into the Cup Series. A couple of familiar faces, and then a couple of guys that are brand new. But if you've been watching NASCAR in the last few years, you're not going to be totally unfamiliar with them. Let's just go through the 4 guys, and then we can kind of chunk this up and see where we want to start here, if we want to compare some guys or not here, Ad. But if you're looking at full-timers, we got 4 different guys, full-time seats this year. We've got Ty Gibbs in the Joe Gibbs 54 car, Noah Gragson running in the, what do you call it, Petty Johnson?
The Petty Johnson. Is that what you call it? Yes.
The Petty Johnson Legacy Motor Club 42. We got Noah Gragson, of course, again. Ryan Preece taking over for our darling Cole Custer in the 41 over at SHR. And then, of course, Everyone's favorite road course racer, AJ Allmendinger, is full time in that Colleague car. Um, I believe the Colleague 16 car, pretty fitting for him since he's been running in the Xfinity series all these years. And you look at these four, pretty talented list. You get some guys usually they're coming in, some guys that are unproven, some guys that maybe could be good, have some potential. No, you look at all four of these guys; they've shown they can compete at a high level.
Yeah, I think obviously it's kind of anytime you hear Ty Gibbs and Noah Gregson's name together, you think of kind of media week and everything that was leading up to last week with the championship with Noah and Ty. So very interested to see. Sometimes these drivers are a lot like elephants; they don't forget much. So kind of anxious to see what that looks like this year. If that, you know, a lot of that stuff kind of got buried under the rug with all of the other headlines that came out of that weekend in Phoenix, and rightfully so. But I mean, those two very clearly don't like each other. So kind of one of those built-in rivalries that we haven't had in NASCAR in a very long time. So I think it'll be interesting, especially because both guys, it's their first full-time seasons. I think that's where I'll start, Bob, and that's going to be the first question I pose to you: is who do you think has more success this year in that kind of built-in young man rivalry between Noah Gragson and Ty Gibbs? What's your take, Bob? Who do you think wins round one here?
The de facto rookie of the year. I mean, you could settle it in a WWE ring, and I'd be just as okay with it. Like you mentioned, that media day at the end last year in Phoenix. I mean, Gragson come out and say, "I don't like the guy. No, I don't. I have no sympathy toward him." And a lot of NASCAR fans feel the same way. I know, Ty has gone through a lot the last few weeks, months. Obviously after the Phoenix race with his family, with his dad. But I'm very curious to see the reception when he gets out on the track because he's not very well liked by his peers or his fans right now. And that being said, you've got to think, well, I mean, he's obviously in the more competitive car there. But Noah Gragson's in a team that I think is building towards something that's going to be like, Joe Gibbs in the future. And I feel like he's probably a little bit more race ready now. Now, this being said, when the playoffs start, Ty Gibbs may be better than Noah Gragson. But I think to start out the season, I think Noah's going to be a little bit more race ready just because of his age and a little bit more maturity, a little bit less off the track going on right now. But man, I'll be honest with you, I don't think either of these guys make the playoffs, to be quite honest with you. I think that these guys have a lot to learn, and in a field that's so stacked right now, it's going to be kind of learning by fire, learning trial by fire.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Bob. I definitely don't think either are playoff drivers. I you know I don't know though, Bob, because I could see one of them maybe falling into a win, at a short track somewhere. But at the same time, it just feels like this is going to be one of those learning years, kind of like we talk about a lot. Kind of you have to learn how to race at the Cup level and understand what it's like to race with some of the elder statesmen of the sport. But I'm just very curious to see those two because I think rightfully so the storylines in the future will be centered around Noah Gragson and Ty Gibbs. So we kind of get each's full time like rookie stab at this whole thing. So I'm very anxious to see how the first full time goes there.
And you mentioned, they have to earn the respect of the drivers around them in the Cup Series. These are two drivers that have had, a lot of incidents on the track. They're very quote unquote immature, if you will, the way they've acted the last few years, especially as championship drivers in Xfinity. So, we'll see if they get away with the antics or if they have to learn really quick that, this is not the same minor league that y'all were in. This is the big boys. This is Sunday with the cameras are on.
Yep, it always seems interesting, when young guys have to take that next step and when that maturity is required. But Bob, these next two drivers that we talked about kind of getting their first full-time Cup ride, maturity is not an issue in Ryan Preece and AJ Allmendinger. Ryan Preece, we've talked about it. We talked about it a little bit in the breakdown for SHR there. A guy who has had his chance before in Cup, just I guess very anxious to see how much has changed in his outlook, how much has changed in his style, and will he be able to make this second opportunity stick at all? What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, and you mentioned our breakdown a few weeks ago on SHR. If you haven't listened, I would definitely go back. because we definitely go a lot of in depth on the SHR, domino effect that this brings, and a lot of pressure on Ryan Preece. This guy has bet on himself the last few years. He's taken a handful of truck starts and taken it and turned it into gold. It was not anything to write home about when he was in that JTD car, the second car, and this is a big opportunity for him in a major car with SHR. He's going to have to take advantage of Cole Custer's missteps last year. Let's call it what it is. Cole Custer was very underwhelming in this 41 car, and SHR as a whole has been pretty underwhelming the last few years. So I think if Ryan Preece is doing well, that means SHR as a whole is doing well. That's indicative. But Adam, I'm very curious what you think about the Dinger, because man, that's the guy I've got hopes about moving forward. All four of these dudes, but Colleague, that's a mystery to me. I don't know if they're going to be great, if they're going to be building. It seems like they're just kind of slowly trending upwards. What do you think?
Out of the four drivers that we've listed to this point, if I were to have to put money down on one of them to win a race and get into the playoffs, I think it's AJ Allmendinger, because there's enough road courses on this schedule that I don't think that it is out of reach to think that they could win a race. I mean, obviously, you touched on the big question. What does the equipment look like for Colleague? Obviously, there's no fear of spending money. So the car will be good. Whether or not it's good enough to win races, I don't know. But I think it definitely helps having a guy like AJ Allmendinger, who is one of the most, probably the single most prolific road course racer in North America right now. I think anytime you've got a guy like that behind the wheel at a road course, you've got a chance to win. So, I mean, until proven differently, until they prove to me that they've just got an absolute bucket of bolts on the track that they're just throwing out there and just, he's not going to get any speed in, I'm not going to bet against AJ Allmendinger, especially off the group of four that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think we've made no bones about it here, Ad. We have very high hopes about AJ Allmendinger because, I mean, let's call it what it is. He's one of the best road course racers in all of North America. When you put him in a car that can even somewhat turn left and right, the man will drive it till it can't drive anymore. He will push it to its limit, and he will make great lap times. So if Colleague can get him an even somewhat competitive car, that man, I think there's 7 road courses again this year on the schedule. I have to double check. Rough estimate in the Bob mind is 7, so we're going to go with 7.
I was going to say, so that seems right.
We're going to go with it's right, folks. You can look it up afterwards and test me. But anyway, are you really going to tell me that AJ Allmendinger is going to get 7 chances at a road course and not going to win one of those races? I'd like to think that, I know this next gen car is going to even the playing field. It already has with road courses. You saw that last year. Guys like Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher. I mean, Chris Bell. I know he won at the Daytona Roval the year before, but he still won at the Charlotte Roval and is not a historically great road course racer. It showed that guys like that can take a step in that car, but when you throw AJ Allmendinger out there, man, it's a whole different game. It's a whole different game, Ad.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's one of those things that if there is an X factor in a car that is supposed to bring parity and kind of level the playing field, it would be having a guy like AJ Allmendinger behind the wheel at some of these road courses. So I think it's a really good get from Colleague. But Bob, you mentioned the parity, and it's something that I've been very curious to talk with you about because with the next gen car, that's really been the conversation. Is we're leveling out the cost of everything. We're going to make things level. But going into the second year, we've had a little bit more time with the parts and the R&D. Do you expect any team to kind of make a jump and maybe have found a way to play with the rules, if they're allowed to at all in any way, to create any sort of parity this year? Or do you think that we see kind of teams not being able to do anything, and we see more of the same, where we see a lot of guys, a lot of different winners, things like that? But I don't know. What do you think? With a year's time, do you think these teams have had enough time to kind of figure out how to play with the rules a little bit here?
Yeah, you got to think that there's going to be somebody For as much research and development, for as much manpower as in these teams, especially the big boys, the Hendricks, the Penske's, the Joe Gibbs, there's so much time and development on these cars that somebody's going to have to find something that's going to push them a little bit further. And I think we're going to see that early on, especially on that West Coast swing where you do Fontana, you do Vegas, you do Phoenix. I wouldn't be shocked if a team comes out and wins two of the three races there and kind of sets forward, hey, we figured out something, whether that's a Joe Gibbs, whether that's a Trackhouse. Could be a Legacy Motorsports. That's the beauty of the next-gen car and the even playing field is that, a team like Legacy might just have found something. I think Trackhouse last year showed that there was consistency by just sticking with it, man. That's all it was. I mean, obviously they inherited the Chip Ganassi empire, so it wasn't like they just built it from scratch. They're like Colleague or some of the other teams, but it's still, when it comes to the next-gen car and you're bringing in all your new people, that's an impossible task. So, to answer your question, the parity part, I mean, there was 19 winners last year, right? I believe 19 in the 36 calendar races. I mean, good Lord, do you think it's even possible that we pass that number this year?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think you're 100% right. You just have to think that somebody somewhere on one of these race teams has, with as much time gets spent in the simulator, everything, somebody has had to figure out a way to get an advantage in one of these cars. And I think now we are going to see that the teams have spent enough time with this car that they're going to be able to find an advantage. So no, I don't think we're going to get the same amount of winners. I think we get less than 19 winners, but that's just because I think, it's just too much time and there's too much money and too much on the line for them to have not found an advantage here. But I'm curious, what do you think, Bob? More or less than 19 winners?
It's such a really interesting question there, Ad, because you could genuinely make a case for both. Just because, and I don't think there's going to be 19 winners either. I'm with you. I think we're going to come back to earth a little bit, just because that's an extreme number. I mean, do I think that Chris Buescher wins another race this year? No. Do I think that Eric Jones wins a race this year? I think it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. I know. Just hear me out.
But that's the thing, Bob. But that's the problem. Is everybody, you look at their names and you say, is it possible? Yeah. Is it likely? No. But that's the beauty of the next gen car. It's parity everywhere, Bob.
I think a guy like AJ Allmendinger or Martin Truex or Ryan Blaney, some of those guys are probably going to win a race, yes, but I think you're going to have some of the guys like Kyle Larson, who had a down year, quote unquote, have 3 wins. A guy like him pushes to 5 wins. A guy like Joe Logano may have 3 wins. Christopher Bell, I think, is going to take a huge step and have 4 to 5 wins. You start to run out of races there at that point, and I think that some guys are going to have to point themselves in again this year. Looking at you, Martin Truex, maybe you can finally do that this year. I don't think there's only going to be a 1 seat at the table kind of thing, but I don't think it's going to be as big of a stress as it was last year. I think you're going to have a couple of guys that win multiple races this year, where last year it was Chase Elliott, Ross Chastain, and Joe Logano both won 2 races going into the playoffs, and then Kyle Larson, I think, had 2 wins. But other than that, it was pretty sporadic. You're going to have a couple of different multiple winners this year.
Yeah, I could definitely see, especially with guys being settled into the next gen car. I think, as the wise philosopher, the Macho Man Randy Savage once said, the cream will rise to the top, Bob. And I think we're going to see that a lot this year. Guys like Larson, Chase Elliott, Chris Bell. Christopher Bell's an interesting guy because made a little bit of a splash in the media this week. Was on a live stream with David Gravel, talking about the Chili Bowl and dirt racing in general, and how his opportunities to go dirt racing have kind of dwindled. And Bob, I think we both watched the clip. He seemed pretty disappointed, I will say. If you haven't seen the clip, to summarize it, he essentially went out and said it was explaining that Coy Gibbs was the driving force behind Christopher Bell's ability to go out and dirt race, because he would run a lot of it by Coy Gibbs. Joe Gibbs apparently just not like the idea of dirt racing at all. So whatever whenever Chris Bell asks or anything like that, he immediately denies him. But Coy Gibbs was apparently pretty good about kind of sneaking him out the back door and letting him go anyway. With Coy being gone, obviously we've talked about the impact on the Gibbs family and stuff like that. But from a racing perspective, Bob, like I said, you and I both watched it. Christopher Bell did not seem too happy in that interview. That tone definitely seemed like there was something missing, but wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, he definitely seemed disappointed, I think. And there's a lot going on at Joe Gibbs right now. Obviously, I think we're in a very much an in-between kind of transition period here. And with that, obviously Joe Gibbs is, the old guard there. Guys like Rick Hendrick have been very anti-dirt racing all of their life, these older owners. But then you see guys like Jeff Gordon come in, like Coy Gibbs, these younger guys. Some of them have driven, some levels before. Coy, I think, drove Busch Series. They know what it's like to be that young driver and just want wheel time. And they can kind of be that voice of reason with the big guy in charge, kind of, they sweeten them up a little. Hey, I understand the frustration. I understand. But this is why they need to do this. And guys like Jeff Gordon and Coy Gibbs were able to get guys like Kyle Larson, Chris Bell, these predominantly dirt racers, to double dip, to go wherever they want, to race on Thursday night and then fly in and qualify Friday or Saturday. That was not the case 20 years ago, Ad. I mean, guys like Tony Stewart, guys like Jeff Gordon would have killed to be in that position. I mean, poor choice of words probably, but I mean, they would have genuinely, taken every opportunity to race dirt on the weeknights there. And so to have this opportunity for Christopher Bell, who's had kind of, the Chili Bowls and the Eldors and all that the last few years, and to kind of have that taken, walked back, by the big man, it's got to be frustrating for him. And is it a change kind of in the shift with Joe Gibbs? Are they going to kind of falter the next few years? Are they not going to be the top Toyota team? I don't know. But I think moving forward, it is interesting to see that, Joe Gibbs is not, all hunky-dory right now.
Bob, I think you're onto something here because, yes, there certainly is a lot of uncertainty. If there is anything certain at the moment, is that there is uncertainty at the Joe Gibbs Racing right now. And honestly, that seems to be leaking everywhere for Toyota because if you look at Toyota as a manufacturer at the moment, Bob, I mean, we don't really know what it looks like. Is 2311 getting ready to kind of jump Joe Gibbs and be the number one Toyota team? And then, of course, you look at the pipeline, and there's not a lot of young drivers. They lost Kyle Busch Motorsports. I think that's one of those things that we talked about it last year a little bit, but what does that do for their development? It just seems like there's more questions than answers going on for Toyota as a manufacturer right now, Bob.
Definitely. And you mentioned the Kyle Busch Motorsports, Chevy getting that as kind of a development series again for their trucks. They don't need that, but it's just another cog in the machine. Chevy has already been the front dominant team in NASCAR the last 20 years plus. And for them to add, Kyle Busch Motorsports into the fleet, for them to add Toyota's top driver for the last 10, 15 years, the face of Toyota racing, to add him into the RCR camp, I mean, that is just a huge domino effect. I mean, you've already seen Chandler Smith commit to the colleague team now. He was a Toyota development guy with KBM. It's going to be a domino effect, I think, for years to come here, Ad, and Chevy only gets stronger. I think that's the biggest thing here. You get teams like Trackhouse that jump in, but now you got Kyle Busch and all that resource in. It's crazy.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like the rich get richer a little bit because, like you said, as much as people for their pride would like to fight it, Chevy has been the most dominant manufacturer in NASCAR for the past 20 years, and it's not even really close. That being said, if there was anybody who was making significant strides, at least in the past decade, it was Toyota, but everything seems to be getting kind of derailed right now. And then, of course, you look on the other side of things, and there's Ford, who had some success last year, obviously ended up winning a championship, but I mean, had the most noticeable mechanical issues throughout the year. I mean, there was obviously the issues with the rocker box catching on fire and all sorts of things going on there. It just felt like they couldn't really catch a break, Bob. There wasn't anything going on from a development standpoint that you just, I don't know. It just seems as if with Chevy taking such consistent steps forward, you would think that Toyota and Ford would do something to match it. But be interesting to see moving forward if Chevy, will continue this dominance, or is Ford actually going to be able to kind of get a little bit more consistency? Is Ford going to be able to find some consistency here to where they can maybe be that second best team right now? Because it doesn't feel like Toyota is in a really good spot to kind of take that number two role, Bob.
And it sounds crazy we're even, slandering Ford like this because of the inconsistency. Because they had the winner. Joey Logano won the championship this year with the blue ovals. I mean, it goes to show, though, Ford had that at the beginning of the season, right, at preseason testing. They were told by NASCAR that the front end or something, they had to redesign it. And that really threw off Arrow for a couple of months there, I think, with Ford and getting going. So they were already kind of behind the eight ball. I think you started to see when Kevin Harvick won back-to-back races toward the end of the summer there. It felt like Ford had kind of turned a window there. And, cautiously optimistic this year that there's going to be a lot more consistency on that Ford side, whether it's through the Penske's, through SHR. I'm not totally sure there. I would think it's going to be the Penske side just because of the caliber of lineup they have with Blaney and Logano, especially their ad. But, I mean, I winning the championship and, finishing the way they did, there's no reason for me to think that Ford can't take that step and challenge Chevy consistently next year.
Yeah.
Toyota, I don't know.
Yeah, Toyota feels like the biggest question mark of all three of the manufacturers, but I don't know, man. It just feels as if, it's weird because Ford did win the championship last year and we're still kind of have these questions. So it just goes to show you. I mean, was it a fluke? Is it one of these things that they're going to maybe take the ball and run with it a little bit? I don't know, but I am anxious to watch it, kind of figure all these things out, especially, Bob, it's just, we say it week after week at this point, but it's just so excited to get cars back on the track, and we're going to have something to talk about. We're going to get a little bit of drama, all sorts of things. I mean, I don't know, Bob. It just puts some fun hypotheticals out there for you to think about. I mean, who knows? I mean, who do you think? I mean, do you think we're going to get drama involved with Ross Chastain or Ty Gibbs first this year? There's all sorts of questions that we can ask.
And there's no way these drivers let Ty Gibbs just push him around. That's going to be one quick ass beating, and it'll be right back to business as usual once that happens. But there is one thing we did not mention that I have got to commend NASCAR for, and we can get into this if we need to a little bit, but I just have to give a round of applause to NASCAR, the sanctioning bodies. It took a few years, but we have finally got rid of stage cautions at road courses. And that is a beautiful thing. For those of you that kind of are like, well, what was that really big deal? You basically had to pick if you wanted to win the stage or the race. And for guys that were in the playoffs, it wasn't worth the risk of winning the race. They took those stage points and played it safe. Totally understand it. But it messed with the flow of races. It took away that kind of, road course feel where everyone was battling against each other. And it was, fuel mileage and strategy. It just turned into racing for points. And it's just really nice to see that NASCAR finally has figured it out that maybe we should step this back. We overstepped our bounds and walked this back a little too far. We don't need stage cautions at road courses. It's a beautiful thing, We did it. We beat it.
It feels nice. I feel heard. I feel seen. Every now and again, a governing body does something that lets you know that they're still listening. And NASCAR getting rid of the stage racing just feels like, you know what? Hey, at least they're listening to the fans, the drivers, everybody who had been clamoring for this for a long time. But then, of course, Bob, with every good, there comes bad. And NASCAR can't seem to ever get out of its way because along with announcing this, they did announce that the Hail Melon, the wall ride, whatever you want to call it, is officially been outlawed. Of course, we are going to see it in just about every piece of marketing material NASCAR could ever conceivably think of, but it will be illegal for on-track use, Bob. Bob, it seems kind of odd that you have to regulate putting your car into the wall and jamming the accelerator down to the floor, but what do you think of this whole thing? I don't know.
You think that sounds extreme, Ad? You think that sounds extreme for a sport, an entity that started because they were moonshining and racing away from cops? You really think that's extreme? I think it's not. I think they've got to literally walk them through the book play by play. I mean, there's literally another rule that came out that said they have to wear fire retardant underwear now because drivers weren't wearing it. And I don't think that there's enough rules for these drivers. They need some regulation in their life. I know you don't like government, big government. Sometimes they need a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do have to protect people from themselves. So maybe there is a positive there, but it just seems like, like I said, we're going to see this every single highlight of anywhere you possibly could, Bob. We're going to see this. So outlawing it seems a little bit ridiculous.
Well, we're 40 minutes in. We got to wrap this thing up. But before we wrap up this NASCAR breakdown, pre-Clash edition, I need a Clash pick for this weekend. Give the people what they want. Who do you think is going to be taking home the gold medal? There are medals for the top three. They're going to do a podium. Who's going to be taking home gold in LA this weekend?
Ooh, oh, goodness, Bob. I'm going to be honest. I think it's going to be the guy who I think has the most to prove. I think he's done a lot of winning this offseason. I think it's going to be contagious for him. I think it's going to be a big bounce back year, we'll call it. It's Kyle Larson, Bob. I think it's hard to pick against him. I just think, the monkey may be off of his back a little bit here. It may be time for him to be able to go into LA and get a win. I think this is the year of Kyle Larson. I'm anxious to see it, Bob.
Hopefully he doesn't, murder Justin Haley going into turn 3 this time. That's an idea of sorts. But Adam, I'm going to be honest. I was a little worried though. The way you were talking, I thought you were going to take my pick there. Because I'm picking a guy that's got a lot to prove. He's been winning this offseason. I'm picking Kyle Busch. I'm picking Kyle Busch to win his first competitive race at RCR because the simulation is too damn wild and I need that in my life, folks. Plus, that 8 car was probably the fastest car last year at the Clash. It won pole for Tyler Reddick and was the best car there until he shifted and broke the transmission, I guess. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to understand racing. I just talk about it for a living. But I think that Kyle Busch, he ran second in the Clash last year. Great car in the 8 car. Let's make some magic. Let's start off the season with a bang, Ad. Kyle Busch in LA.
Yep. I mean, no bang bigger than Pitbull last year, but I think it's going to be a fun one nonetheless, Bob. If you followed along to this point, thank you so much. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. We'll be here, weekly racing content. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because we're going to be here. We're going to spew hot takes like hotcakes all year. There's going to be some absurd takes. There will be fun jokes. There will be emotions. There will be things happening all the time. I can assure you this much because buckle the fuck up, ladies and gentlemen, because it's a long season and we're going to be here with you every step of the way on the Breaking Balls podcast. Bob, final thought.
Racing!
America. We'll see you later, ladies and gentlemen.